When people hear the name Hell's Angels, what comes to mind? Rebellion, right? Freedom. Leather jackets catching the wind on open highways. The rumble of chrome and steel. Hollywood has sold us this image for decades. The outlaw biker, the misunderstood renegade, the man who plays by his own rules. We've romanticized them in films, in music, in the collective American imagination. They're supposed to represent some kind of raw, authentic masculinity, some kind of independence from the system. But let me tell you what those engines really carried one summer night in San Diego, California. Let me tell you what rebellion really looked like when it rolled down Newport Avenue in 2023. Because in one California beach town, those motorcycles, those symbols of freedom, they carried something far darker than any script could capture. They carried hate. Pure, unadulterated, deliberate hate. And before you think this is just another crime story, before you settle back and prepare yourself for the usual narrative arc of crime and punishment, let me be clear. This isn't that kind of story. This is a story about a system that looked the other way so many times it forgot how to see it all. Picture this. Early summer evening in San Diego. The kind of night where the ocean breeze carries the smell of salt and freedom, where young people gather to enjoy the simple pleasure of being alive, being together, being human. 3 young black men, just 3 friends, standing on Newport Avenue, probably talking about nothing and everything the way young people do. Maybe they were discussing their plans for the weekend. Maybe they were debating sports or music or which taco shop had the best carne asada. The mundane beauty of ordinary life. That ordinariness was about to be shattered. Suddenly, and isn't it always suddenly when violence erupts in peaceful moments, they found themselves surrounded. Not by 2 or 3 men. Not by a handful of troublemakers. 17 bikers, engines still warm from the ride, leather creaking as they dismounted, boots heavy on the pavement. The Hells Angels had arrived. And those 3 young men, they knew immediately. You always know. There's something about the energy of mob violence, something primal and terrifying that announces itself before a single word is spoken. The air gets thick. Time slows down. Your body starts making calculations about escape routes before your mind fully processes what's happening. The verbal abuse came first. Because it always does, doesn't it? They need to dehumanize you first. They need to make you less than human before they can justify what comes next. The words hurled that night weren't random insults tossed out in drunken stupidity. They weren't the unfortunate byproduct of too much alcohol and too little sense. No. These words were chosen. They were precise. They were meant to remind those young men that they didn't belong there. That this beach, this street, this town, this entire world, it wasn't for them. Can you imagine? Can you actually put yourself in that moment? You're just existing, just breathing, just being, and 17 men appear to tell you that your existence is an offense. That your presence is a provocation. That your skin is a crime. The verbal assault escalated, because it always does when hatred is given permission to breathe. Words became shoves. Shoves became punches. And then, because 17 against 3 wasn't enough of an advantage, because fists alone couldn't satisfy whatever demonic hunger drove them that night, the weapons came out. 2 of those young men managed to escape. Let that sink in for a moment. 2 of them ran for their lives through the streets of an American city in 2023, pursued by a mob of grown men on motorcycles. They ran like their ancestors ran from lynch mobs, like fugitives ran from slave catchers, like human beings have always run when hate decides to put on boots and come looking for blood. But the 3rd man, he wasn't so lucky. Or maybe he was too brave, too stubborn, too shocked to run fast enough. Whatever the reason, they caught him. 17 men descended on one human being. They beat him. They beat him unconscious. And then, when he was already broken and bleeding and no longer a threat to anyone, someone pulled out a knife. They stabbed him. A hate crime. Attempted murder. On a summer evening in California. In 2023. Not 1923. Not in some distant, shameful chapter of history we can pretend we've moved past. Last year. You want to know what happened next? You want to hear about swift justice? About the system working exactly as it's supposed to? About arrests made and rights upheld and equality under the law? 3 months. 3 months passed before any arrests were made. 90 days. 13 weeks. 2,160 hours. While the victim recovered from stab wounds and a concussion, while his friends dealt with trauma, while their families tried to process how an ordinary summer evening became a nightmare, the perpetrators walked free. They rode their bikes. They drank their beer. They probably laughed about it. For 3 months, 17 men who had participated in a racist mob attack went about their lives as if nothing had happened. As if they hadn't just reminded an entire community that certain lives are still considered disposable in America. When the arrests finally came, prosecutors charged all 17 Hells Angels members with hate crimes and attempted murder. The charges were serious. The evidence was abundant. Witnesses had seen everything. The verbal slurs were documented. The violence was undeniable. This should have been an open and shut case. One name quickly dominated the headlines: Troy Anthony Schurz. Not because he was the only one who deserved attention. Not because the other 16 were somehow less culpable. But because Troy's history was so extensive, so violent, so repeatedly enabled by the justice system that even the media couldn't ignore it. Troy Anthony Schurz. A veteran member of the Hells Angels. And when I say veteran, I don't mean he'd been with them for a few years. This man had decades with the gang. Decades of membership in an organization that has been linked to white supremacy, to violence, to organized crime. Decades of wearing those colors, riding with those men, participating in that culture. It took months, to officially name the culprits. But it took the community minutes to recognize a pattern. Because this wasn't new. This wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't some aberration in an otherwise peaceful organization. This was business as usual. Let me tell you about Troy Anthony Schurz. Let me paint you a picture of the man who wielded that knife, because his story isn't just about one violent criminal. His story is about every institution that looked at his record and decided he deserved another chance. And another. And another. Decades in the Hells Angels. Think about that commitment to hate. Most people struggle to commit to a gym membership for a year, but this man dedicated his entire adult life to an organization steeped in violence and white supremacy. His body told the story his lawyers probably wished remained hidden. Tattoos covered his skin, not artistic expressions of individuality but symbols. Symbols of hate. The kind of imagery that doesn't accidentally end up on someone's body. The kind of ink that requires deliberate choices, repeated visits to tattoo artists, conscious commitment to an ideology that views human beings as more or less valuable based on the color of their skin.
Every tattoo was a statement. Every symbol was a declaration. And everyone who saw him, law enforcement, judges, fellow gang members, victims, they all knew exactly what those declarations meant. But here's what really twists the knife of injustice into your gut: the arrests. Multiple prior arrests for assault. Not one. Not two. Many. Assault after assault after assault. A pattern of violence so clear you could trace it like a roadmap of pain through the California legal system. And what happened to those arrests? They were downgraded. Dismissed. Reduced to misdemeanors. Probation instead of prison time. Community service instead of consequences. Each time, each single time, the system gave him a break. It gave him a green light. Not just to him, but to everyone watching. It said, this kind of violence is tolerable. These victims are acceptable losses. These crimes aren't really crimes at all, just boys being boys, bikers being bikers, men being men. Every reduced charge was permission. Every dismissed case was encouragement. Every lenient sentence was an invitation to do it again. Let me take you through the trail of blood. Because it was always there. The justice system just refused to follow it. Troy attacks a black man. The victim's crime? Asking Troy to stop smoking. That's it. A polite request. Hey, could you not smoke here? And Troy's response was violence. Assault. Rage. The physical enforcement of the idea that he doesn't have to respect anyone, that his comfort matters more than another man's right to breathe clean air, that being asked to modify his behavior by a black man is an offense worthy of physical retaliation. The charge? Misdemeanor. A slap on the wrist. Maybe a fine. Maybe some community service. Nothing that would make him think twice about doing it again. The message sent? This is acceptable. This black man's safety isn't as important as this white man's freedom. Troy leads a brutal gang assault on another member. Now we're not even talking about random victims anymore. This is within the organization. This is the violence turned inward, the hierarchy enforced through fists and boots. Multiple people involved. Multiple injuries. Multiple witnesses. And Troy serves 1 year. 1 year for leading a gang assault. 1 year for organizing violence. 1 year for being the kind of person who gathers other violent men and points them at a target. 1 year. He probably spent more time shopping for his motorcycle than he spent in prison for that crime. Troy is found hiding in Canada. Hiding. Fleeing. Running from consequences like a coward despite all the tough guy imagery. And when he's caught? Released again. Sent back across the border with barely a slap on the wrist. At what point does the pattern become undeniable? At what point do we stop pretending these are isolated incidents and start acknowledging the systematic enabling of racist violence? Every arrest that led to nothing. Every charge that got downgraded. Every sentence that was laughably light. They weren't accidents. They weren't the result of insufficient evidence or complicated legal technicalities. They were choices. Choices made by prosecutors who decided not to push too hard. Choices made by judges who saw a white man in biker leather and thought, troubled, instead of dangerous. Choices made by a system that has always valued certain lives more than others. The trail of blood was always there. Victim after victim. Year after year. Decade after decade. And the justice system just looked the other way. Every single time. Let me be absolutely clear about something, because I'm tired of the euphemisms and the carefully neutral language we're supposed to use when discussing these issues. The Hells Angels aren't a motorcycle club. They're not a brotherhood of misunderstood rebels. They're not lovable rogues with hearts of gold beneath the rough exterior. They're a network. A network of racists who have traded leather for swastikas, who have weaponized the mythology of the American outlaw to protect themselves while terrorizing others. They're an organization that has been linked, repeatedly and undeniably, to white supremacy, to organized crime, to violence against minorities. And every time one of them gets away with it, every reduced charge, every light sentence, every case quietly dismissed, it sends a message. Not just to them, but to us. To every person of color who has to calculate the risk of walking down a street at night. To every family who has to have the talk with their children about how to interact with police, with angry white men, with authority figures who might not see them as fully human. The message is clear: their comfort matters more than your safety. Their freedom matters more than your life. Their violence is understandable, forgivable, acceptable, but your existence is the real provocation. This isn't speculation. This isn't hyperbole. This is pattern recognition based on decades of evidence. Think about how we talk about these organizations. The media calls them clubs. We use words like brotherhood and loyalty. We make movies romanticizing the biker lifestyle. We treat them like they're rebels against an oppressive system, when in reality, they're the ones doing the oppressing. When white men form violent organizations, we call them clubs and brotherhoods. When black men form organizations, we call them gangs. The language itself is biased, the framing is designed to elicit sympathy for one group and fear of the other. The Hells Angels have been connected to murder, to drug trafficking, to assault, to organized crime for decades. But we still let them ride through our cities with their colors displayed proudly. We still treat membership in the organization as if it's a lifestyle choice rather than an announcement of violent intent. Imagine if a known terrorist organization was allowed to parade through American cities openly displaying their symbols. Imagine if we romanticized and celebrated them in popular culture. The outrage would be immediate and justified. But because these are white men on motorcycles, because they fit a particular American archetype, because we've been sold the story of the outlaw biker for so long that it feels like tradition, we look the other way. Every time one of them gets away with violence, it reinforces the system. It tells other members that they're protected. It tells victims that they're expendable. It tells society that this hierarchy of human value is acceptable. The myth of outlaw romance, it's not harmless nostalgia. It's active cover for racist violence. Every movie that portrays these men as complicated anti-heroes rather than violent criminals. Every TV show that humanizes their code while ignoring their victims. Every piece of media that treats their leather and chrome as symbols of freedom rather than tools of intimidation. This is selective empathy on a massive scale. We're asked to understand their choices, their motivations, their code of honor. But their victims? They're just statistics. Just names in police reports. Just another news story that gets buried under more important coverage. And now, let's talk about privilege. Real privilege. Not the abstracted academic kind that people argue about online, but concrete, measurable, life and death privilege. The verdict came down. After all the evidence, all the witnesses, all the undeniable proof of a hate crime committed by 17 men against 3, what did justice look like? Troy Anthony Schurz, the man with the knife, the man with decades of violent history, the man whose body was covered in hate symbols, he was sentenced to 39 years. Finally, you might think. Finally, consequences that match the crime. Except they didn't stick. The sentence was reduced. Cut down to 21 years. 18 years removed with the stroke of a pen. 18 years of accountability erased. For leading a racist mob attack. For stabbing an unarmed man. For terrorizing a community. 21 years. He'll probably be out in less with good behavior. A man in his position probably knows how to work the system by now. But it gets worse. Because Troy wasn't the only one involved. Remember, 17 men participated in this attack. 17 men surrounded 3 young men. 17 men hurled racial slurs. 17 men created an environment of terror so complete that 2 victims had to literally run for their lives. 13 of those men received light sentences. Probation. Community service. Slaps on the wrist so light they probably didn't even sting. Some of them got to go home the same day. Some of them probably high-fived each other afterward. And here's the detail that would be funny if it weren't so enraging: some of them tested positive for drugs while on trial. While on trial for a hate crime. While supposedly demonstrating their character to the court, proving they deserved leniency, showing they were capable of following rules, they couldn't even stay sober. And it didn't matter. They still got light sentences. They still walked away largely unpunished. If you ever wondered what privilege looks like in handcuffs, this was it. This is the face of a system that protects its own even when its own are violent racists who can't follow basic legal requirements. Let me paint you another picture for contrast. Imagine if 17 black men had surrounded 3 white bikers and attacked them. Imagine if they'd hurled racial slurs and beaten one unconscious and stabbed him. Imagine if those black men had lengthy criminal records. Imagine if some of them tested positive for drugs during trial. Can you even imagine that scenario resulting in 13 men getting probation? Can you conceive of a universe where that happens? Because I can't. In that universe, we'd have politicians calling for maximum sentences. We'd have media coverage about the dangers of gang violence. We'd have community meetings about safety and order and the importance of harsh punishment as deterrent. But these were white bikers. These were Hell's Angels. These were men who fit a particular cultural archetype that America has decided to romanticize rather than criminalize. So they got leniency. They got understanding. They got second chances and third chances and chances beyond counting. Their victims got scars. Physical and psychological. They got the memory of being hunted through city streets. They got the knowledge that the system doesn't value their safety as much as it values their attackers' freedom. That's privilege. Real, measurable, life-altering privilege. The privilege to be violent and be seen as misunderstood rather than dangerous. The privilege to break laws while on trial and still receive mercy from the court. The privilege to participate in a racist mob attack and face minimal consequences. Let's zoom out for a moment. Let's talk about the bigger picture, because this isn't just about one attack in San Diego. This is about how we've normalized certain types of violence in America. The media keeps dressing these men in denim halos. We keep calling them rebels. We keep using language that suggests they're fighting against something oppressive, standing up to an unjust system, living by some admirable code of independence. But real rebellion fights oppression, it doesn't wear it as a badge. Real rebellion stands up for the powerless, not against them. Real rebellion challenges systems of injustice, not enforces them. Real rebellion risks something to make the world more equal, not to maintain hierarchies of hate. These men aren't rebels. They're enforcers. They're the foot soldiers of white supremacy with better branding. They're the same hate that's always existed in America, just dressed up in leather and given a soundtrack of rumbling engines. And we let them. We, collectively, culturally, systematically, we let them maintain this image. We let movies portray them as complicated anti-heroes. We let TV shows humanize their violence. We let the mythology persist because it serves a larger cultural narrative about masculine independence that America is deeply invested in maintaining. But here's what that mythology costs: it costs lives. It costs safety. It costs justice. Every time we romanticize violent white male archetypes, we make it a little bit easier for the next Troy Schurz to get away with it. Every time we treat organizations like the Hell's Angels as if they're just colorful local characters rather than organized hate groups, we give them cover to operate. The entertainment industry bears enormous responsibility here. How many movies have you seen that portray bikers as misunderstood tough guys with hearts of gold? How many times have we been asked to sympathize with the outlaw, to see the humanity in the enforcer, to understand why he had to be violent? And how often do those same movies bother to show us the victims? How often do we see the families destroyed by that violence? How often are we asked to sympathize with the person who got beaten, stabbed, terrorized? We're taught to identify with the perpetrator when he looks a certain way. We're taught to see his violence as understandable, his rage as justified, his code as honorable. But when the victims are black or brown, when they're gay or trans, when they're women or immigrants, suddenly the narrative shifts. Suddenly we're asked to consider what they might have done to provoke the violence. Suddenly their backgrounds are scrutinized for any detail that might make them seem less innocent. This is normalization. This is how white supremacy maintains itself even as we pretend we've moved beyond it. Not through overt laws and explicit segregation, but through cultural narratives that teach us who deserves sympathy and who deserves suspicion. Connect the dots. Connect the biker imagery to white supremacy normalization. Connect the media glorification to real-world violence. Connect the lenient sentences to the message it sends about whose lives matter. This isn't separate from other forms of racial injustice. It's part of the same system. The same system that gives different sentences for the same crimes based on race. The same system that values certain neighborhoods over others. The same system that teaches us to fear some people and romanticize others based on nothing more than skin color and cultural stereotypes. And what are we supposed to do with this information? Are we supposed to just accept it? Are we supposed to shrug and say, that's just how it is? Are we supposed to become so overwhelmed by the scale of the injustice that we sink into outrage fatigue and stop caring? No. We're supposed to stay aware. We're supposed to recognize the patterns. We're supposed to call it out every single time we see it. We're supposed to refuse to participate in the mythology. We're supposed to change the narrative.
When someone tries to romanticize outlaw bikers, remind them of nights like this one in San Diego. When media portrays these organizations as harmless clubs, point out the trail of victims. When someone gets a light sentence for racist violence, make noise about it. Make it impossible to ignore. Awareness isn't passive. It's not just knowing things are wrong. It's refusing to look away. It's insisting that the story be told completely, honestly, without the comfortable mythology that lets us avoid the ugly truth. They call themselves angels. Let that irony sink in for a moment. Angels. Divine messengers. Protectors. Beings of light and goodness. But angels don't leave hate bleeding on the pavement. Angels don't surround the outnumbered and terrorize them for entertainment. Angels don't carry knives into attacks on unarmed young men whose only crime was existing in the wrong place with the wrong skin color. These men are many things, but angels isn't one of them. Remember their names. Not because they deserve to be remembered, but because forgetting enables repetition. Remember Troy Anthony Schurz. Remember the 17 men who participated. Remember that they were Hell's Angels members, that this wasn't random violence but organizational culture made manifest. Remember their victims. 3 young black men who just wanted to enjoy a summer evening. Remember the one who was stabbed, who carries those scars forever. Remember the 2 who had to run, who had to feel the terror of being hunted. Remember that they did nothing wrong. Nothing. Their only transgression was being black in a space that white supremacists had decided belonged to them. Remember who's rewriting the story. Because that's what's happening right now in real time. The narrative is already being softened. The sentences have already been reduced. In a few years this will be a footnote. In a decade, it might be forgotten entirely except by the people who lived it. The media will move on to the next story. The courts will process the next cases. The Hells Angels will continue to ride through American cities with their colors displayed proudly. And somewhere, another Troy Schurz is learning that he can get away with it too. That the system will protect him. That his violence is acceptable. That certain lives are still considered disposable. Unless we refuse to let it be rewritten. Unless we insist on the complete story, the honest accounting, the real consequences. Unless we connect this incident to the pattern, and the pattern to the system, and the system to the culture that enables it. This isn't just about one attack in San Diego. This is about every hate crime that gets downgraded to assault. Every racist slur that gets dismissed as just words. Every violent organization that gets portrayed as a harmless club. Every light sentence that sends the message that this kind of violence is tolerable. This is about whether we're going to continue looking away, or whether we're going to finally see what's been in front of us all along. Stay aware. Not just about this case but about all the ways this pattern repeats. All the ways the system protects certain people while abandoning others. All the ways we're taught to sympathize with violence when it wears the right uniform. Stay sharp. Question the narratives you're fed. Interrogate the mythology. Don't accept the comfortable stories that let us avoid uncomfortable truths. When someone tries to paint these men as misunderstood rebels, remember the blood on the pavement. Remember the victims. Remember the pattern. Because the real criminals aren't always the ones the headlines show you. Sometimes the real crime is in what doesn't make headlines. The charges that get quietly reduced. The sentences that get shortened. The organizations that get romanticized instead of investigated. The victims who get forgotten while perpetrators get humanized. The real crime is a system that looks at decades of violent racist behavior and keeps giving second chances. That looks at 17 men attacking 3 and calls the sentence justice when most of them walk away with probation. that allows organizations with documented ties to white supremacy to operate openly while criminalizing communities of color for far less. That's the real crime. And we're all complicit if we don't see it, name it, and refuse to accept it. Good day. And stay awake. Because the moment we start sleepwalking through this reality, the moment we accept it as normal, the moment we stop feeling the anger and pain that righteous injustice should provoke, that's the moment we lose whatever chance we have of changing it. They call themselves angels. But we don't have to accept their mythology. We can call them what they are, violent racists enabled by a system that values their freedom more than their victims' lives. Remember. Remember everything. Remember the names, remember the pattern, remember who the system protects and who it abandons. And refuse to forget. That's where change starts. With refusing to forget, refusing to look away, refusing to accept the comfortable lies that let hate ride freely through our cities while justice moves at a crawl. Stay awake.